This is Tim, and this is Deconstructing Comics. Welcome to Deconstructing Comics. This is Tim in Tokyo. This week, the second of two interviews with single-panel cartoonists, as I talk to Dan Piraro, creator of the syndicated comic Bizarro. We'll talk about how The Far Side blazed a trail for Bizarro, the strange story of his realization that his strip shared a name with a Superman character, the story involves Jerry Seinfeld, the hidden symbols in his comic, his fine art and vaudeville act, and much more. But first, remember that you can help this podcast by making your Amazon purchases via deconstructingcomics.com/Amazon and make that your bookmark for future purchases. We'll then get a percentage of what you spend. It costs you nothing extra and helps us cover web hosting and the other costs of presenting this show every week. Hey, I'm talking with Dan Piraro, who's in California. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Okay. So Dan does the comic Bizarro. Actually, this interview is at the request of at least two listeners who were interested in hearing Dan talk about himself. So,
that's nice to hear.
Yeah. So, let's start at the beginning. Now, I guess you grew up in Oklahoma?
I did, yes. First, I went to elementary school in a really small town called Ponca City, Ponca, Ponca City, Oklahoma. And then I went to junior high and high school in Tulsa. And my family still lives in Tulsa, so I visit there regularly.
Okay. What comics or cartoons did you like when you were growing up?
It's funny. I looked at newspaper comics every day, and one of the ones that was really a favorite of mine was because of the artwork mostly was Tumbleweeds, and I still to this day. I like Old West stuff. I've always been attracted to that. When I was a little kid, I actually wanted to be a cowboy. And then I realized that there was a whole social thing that went along with being a cowboy. Like you had to be one of those kind of guys, and that didn't appeal to me. So of course I became a cowboy. But
they're kind of the bros of their day, maybe.
yeah. It's like it was a whole. Yeah, I mean, I was also good at sports, and I played on all the sports teams until I got into junior high school, and it became a social thing. Like you were either a jock or you were not, and I wasn't a jock. I wasn't that kind of a guy. I was an artistic, sort of independent thinker who also liked to play sports. But yeah, I'd been in socially, so I quit playing on teams and stuff. But Tumbleweeds. So I to this day I still think that Tumbleweeds are really well designed. I love the weird character design of that cartoon strip. It's just unique. Like there is. Cartoons, especially newspaper cartoons, can be so derivative of each other, especially style-wise, drawing-wise, and that one just isn't. It's just very, it's very different. And I thought the gags were fun. It's just like the Old West thing. So, anyway, that was one of my favorites. But my real favorite cartoons as a kid were magazine cartoons, particularly National Lampoon. But the kind of stuff that nowadays people think of those kinds of single-panel magazine cartoons as being the New Yorker, like that's it. But when I was a kid in the 60s, every magazine was full of cartoons. It wasn't just the New Yorker. It's just that the New Yorker is the only one that never gave that up for some reason back in the day. And they always had the cream of the crop. They always had, like, most of the best cartoonists, or a lot of very good cartoonists worked for New Yorker magazine. But there were a ton in National Lampoon, and then later in Heavy Metal, I guess. But anyway, that was my favorite. And that was why I think that's really why I ended up being the kind of cartoonist I am, with just the oddball joke a day without any regular characters or storylines. Because those were my favorite kind of cartoons as a kid, was just those strains, like Charles Addams and Gain Wilson and Sam Gross, gosh, one of the best gag writers, simple gag writers of all time. Those were the kind of cartoons that really thrilled me as a kid. And then when I was in college, I came across Kliban, Kliban, and even real cartoon fans a lot of times don't know who this guy is. But outside of the striped black and white cat that almost everybody has on an apron somewhere in their house with the tennis shoes, the cat with the tennis shoes. Yeah, but that was like, that was not what thrilled me about him. It was the oddball single panel cartoons that he put together in books, collected in books in the 70s, and that was the guy that really got me. When I saw those books, the first one was Never Eat Anything Bigger Than Your Head and Other Stories, I think was the last word, and other something, other tales, other stories, whatever. That first book, which I still have somewhere around here, that was the book that made me want to be a cartoonist, to be honest. I saw that in 1976, and I just thought, wow, this is amazing. These are such strange drawings.
Yeah, well, actually, I just recently talked with Joe Dater, who draws for the New Yorker, and
right.
He also talked a lot about Kliban and how he influenced his work, and I guess Kliban was the influence on Gary Larson. At least, would you agree with that?
I would totally agree with that. In fact, the first time I saw The Far Side, I was like, oh, this guy's ripping off Kliban. At least drawing-wise. Yeah, that's sort of a, I mean, I'm a fan of Gary Larson. I like his work. I've met him a couple of times, which is twice more than most people have ever met him, because he's quite the reclusive. Yeah, but I've met him and hung out with him twice, and chatted him up. He's a very nice guy, just super shy. That's why he's so reclusive. Just doesn't want to be famous. But the thing about is that what bugs me, and this isn't Gary's fault, is that people assume that just because they're not knowledgeable about the history of cartooning, they assume, too many people assume, that unusual, like surreal single-panel cartoonists like myself are derivatives of The Far Side. Mm-hmm. No, The Far Side is a derivative of magazine cartoons. That was the difference. Historically, he was the first person who did those kind of cartoons, who a syndicate tried to sell to newspapers instead of relegating entirely to magazines. And it started to work, and it opened the door for a lot of people doing.
Okay. So it was just
what used to
a new venue for that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's just a new venue, he didn't originate the style, and he he wasn't the first person in the world to do surreal single panel gags that didn't make a whole lot of sense in the real world. He was one of many great cartoonists in a long history of that. I still bristle every now and then just because I happen to be like 5 years younger than Gary, so I came along 5 years after he did. And people are like, oh yeah, you're one of those Far Side cartoonists. No, I'm not. Please don't say that.
I see. So how old were you when you started like really seriously drawing, thinking of it as a career?
I'm still wondering if it's a career. I started drawing. I did little other than draw when I was a kid. If I was indoors, I was drawing. If I was outdoors, I was, playing sports or Army or Spaceman or whatever the neighborhood kids were playing. It's not that I never went outdoors, I did. But when I was indoors, I was always drawing. Even when I was watching TV, I was drawing. Just because that was just my favorite thing to do, always and forever. I just loved it. And so I grew up thinking that I would be, and I was a huge fan of Salvador Dali, and I grew up thinking that I would be a painter. That was what I wanted out of life. I had no idea as a kid in Oklahoma. My family is artistic in the sense that they all have art talents, but nobody turned it into a real, anything beyond a hobby. Nobody ever turned it into a job. So nobody had any. My dad was a petroleum engineer. My mom was a stay-at-home housewife of the typical type of the 1960s. So no, I had no idea how to turn art into a career. I went to fine art school at Washington University in St. Louis. I had a scholarship, a fine art scholarship, and I just completely didn't get it. At the time, art schools in the United States in the 70s, this was in the mid-70s, were all about just incomprehensible nonsense bullshit crap art that didn't stick around very long. What do they call it? I can't think of the word right now. It was oh God, what is it? Anyways, it's like a pile of broken glass with 4 paragraphs explaining how this has social meaning, that kind of shit.
Yeah, okay. I can't quite think the term either. It's not performance art.
I also want to say non-representational.
Okay.
What did you say? Something, Chris?
Abstract or?
Nah. It starts with a C. It's like
Contemporary?
What?
Contemporary?
No. It's more specific than that. Anyway, my all of us trying to
Conceptual.
Conceptual. That's the word.
Okay.
Conceptual art. Yes, it's nothing beyond a concept. That's all there is to conceptual art in my mind. Anyway, that's what they were teaching in art school, and I just hated it. I knew what I wanted to do. I just wanted to learn how to do certain techniques and stuff like that. And they just weren't teaching that back then. So you couldn't, like, when I was in school in 1976, the semester that I went to fine art school, a pile of broken glass would get you an A. And this literally happened. That's why I always refer to this. This literally happened. A person had a pile of broken glass just swept into a pile. And then an explanation of what it was about. They got an A. And I did something that I did a drawing of something that looked like something, and I got a C. Even though it was a really good drawing. So that was just the state of fine arts schools, certainly the one that I was going to at the time. And so I just failed. I quit, and I had no idea what to do with it, with myself in the world. So I just started doing crap jobs, and little by little I worked my way into commercial art. Which was painful, but advertising art, at least I was drawing, which at the time was better than the sort of minimum wage jobs I had been working. And I was making more money drawing crummy snack food products and stuff, you know. And the people I was working with were kind of cool. They were artsy types, you know. And anyway, so I got into that whole deal, and I didn't really like advertising art at all. And after a few years of that, I thought, wait a minute, maybe I could be a cartoonist. So in my mid-20s, I was about 24. I started drawing cartoons, just exploring it, just sort of having fun with it, thinking, I don't know, is there a market in this? Could I do this? And then somebody suggested, you ought to try to get these published in the newspaper. And I was like, nah, they don't put cool cartoons in the newspaper. All they have in the newspaper is like Dennis the Menace and Family Circus. And I'm certainly not doing those kind of drawings. And they said, no, look at this. And they showed me The Far Side. The Far Side had only been out just for 3 or 4 years. And I hadn't seen it. And I was like, oh my gosh, they really are putting cool cartoons in the newspaper. Maybe I will try to get some kids. So I started setting my stuff off. And it took me about 1.5 years, 2 years of getting polite rejection letters. But eventually Chronicle Features, which is now gone, but it was a syndication arm of the San Francisco Chronicle. They had a very small syndicate, and they're actually the same ones that started Gary Larson out, Far Side. And so I sent my stuff to them, and about this time, Gary started to catch on. And he started to sell more and more pages. Newspapers started to catch on to what he was doing, and he'd been around about 5 years, and he started selling newspapers right and left, and people were enjoying the cartoons, and it became popular. And then he jumped to a larger syndicate at the end of his first contract, which was 5 years. He jumped to a larger syndicate, and they hired me because they had a space. They'd lost their oddball cartoonist, so they ended up syndicating me, and that was how I got my start in the newspapers.
I see.
I was about 26, I think.
Yeah, and 26. Yeah, that all fits because I researched and I saw Far Side started in 80 and you started in 85, so
right,
fits together. Okay. And so when you got picked up by a syndicate, I mean, was that a quit your day job type of event, or how long did it take a while before it was like something you could live off of, or is it something you can live off of still now?
It is now, but the day that I got syndicated, I thought, my ship's coming, I get to quit my day job, and I was right, but I was 12 years off. It took me 12 years of syndication before Bizarro was making enough money to even remotely replace what I was making in advertising at the time. And the thing was, I had a wife and 2 kids. two little small daughters, and so she was a stay-at-home mom because my advertising income was good enough to support that. She wanted to stay home and raise the kids, so that was where we were. And as the syndicate money was just trickling in the first year, I think I averaged about $100 a month or something off of Bizarro. It was really slow going. So yeah, it was years before I was able to quit my day job entirely and just do the cartoon strip. I think it was 12 years before I quit. And I was still freelancing as an illustrator at the time, so it's not like I just quit and said, okay, now I got money. No, I was still working another job. It just wasn't an office job. I wasn't working I was doing freelance stuff instead of working for
So it was all drawing related, but
yeah.
Okay. So why did
but eventually I quit that too.
Why did you call the comic Bizarro?
Ooh, yeah, I came up with a handful of names. We were trying to find something to name it. I came up with a handful of names, and I don't remember any of them now. I don't remember a single other name but one of them was Bizarro, and it's just because it rhymes with my last name, Piraro, and it in Spanish, in Latin languages, Bizarro means the same as bizarre in English, and so I just thought, well, this rhymes with my name, and I'm drawing these oddball things, and so there's no more complicated than that. And the syndicate went, yeah, that makes sense. We like it. It rhymes with your name, and you're drawing bizarre things. We get it. Okay, that's the name. So there we go. And you know what? At the time, I had never, because I wasn't a big comic book reader. I was a comic book looker. I bought comic books as a kid, and for the art, but I never cared much for the stories, so I didn't really even read them. I had never heard of Bizarro Superman, the whole Bizarro world. I had never heard of it. And you know who the first person, this is actually kind of a funny anecdote, the first person to tell me, or to ask me if Bizarro was named after the Superman thing, was Jerry Seinfeld. in person. And yeah, I know, this is a strange story, and it's absolutely true. I was a fan of, I was a big fan of stand-up comedians. And so I would watch, and back then there was no cable TV. Anyway, so I saw Jerry Seinfeld on The Tonight Show a few times, and I really loved him. I thought he was great. And at the time I lived in Dallas, Texas. When I was an adult, I moved from Tulsa, Oklahoma to Dallas, Texas. Just sort of a bigger version of the same city. But, at the time. So anyway, so they had an improv club, and I had become a fan of Jerry Seinfeld as a stand-up comic on The Tonight Show in the 70s. And so then I saw him in this was still the mid 80s, shortly after I got syndicated. I'd been out for about a year and a half or something, and I went to see him at the Improv or whatever, some comedy club in Dallas. And he didn't have his TV show yet, so he wasn't hugely famous. And he would just stand by the bar and sip on a club soda or something until his set, and then after his set, he would stand by the bar and sip on a club soda, and you could just walk up to him and talk to him like he was a real person. So I did that, and I brought him a little small group of my cartoons, and I asked him, I said, if I ever get a book deal, I would love to have a blurb by you on the back of the book. He says, oh, cool. And what's your cartoon called? I said, Bizarro. He goes, oh, really? It's named after the Superman thing. And I went, what's that? What a goofus. It's an embarrassing story to this day. And he's like, oh, you don't know about Bizarro Lands or Bizarro World or whatever the hell it's called? And Superman comics? I go, no, I don't think I've heard of that. I must have just come off like a complete idiot to it. And he went, okay, well, anyway, so I gave him a self-addressed stamped envelope.
So Jerry felt like he was in Bizarro World. He met somebody who didn't know what it was.
Yeah, and I was pretending to be a cartoonist who'd never heard of Bizarro World on Superman. So anyway, a few weeks later, he mailed. Like I said, I gave him a self-addressed stamped envelope and a piece of blank paper to make it easy for him, and he actually, and a stack of my cartoons. And so he read them and wrote down a little thing, wrote a blurb for me, and sent it to me. And I used it on 2 or 3 books throughout my career. I used it several times. Because then he became hugely famous. 10 years later, he was one of the most famous comedians in the whole world. Mm-hmm. And I was like, I just felt like I was lucky for having gotten to talk to him, or having gotten that blurb before he stopped answering that kind of mail.
Yeah. I see. Okay, so doing a one-panel cartoon, I mean, it seems like, just having one panel to get your point across, that one picture has to do a lot of work. So what are some key things to keep in mind to get your whole idea across in one panel?
Yeah, I don't know. That's kind of, it's kind of an academic question, and it's one that I would have an answer to had I ever tried to teach cartooning, but I haven't.
Mm-hmm.
So I've never thought, it's like, I've been doing it for 31 years now, 31 and a half years, and it's become second nature, and I learned it sort of by trial and error. I instinctively would draw what I thought would work, and then over the years I've seen what works and what doesn't, and I just, as one does, if they practice anything every day for 30 years, you start to get the hang of it. And eventually I got the hang of how to get a complicated idea across in a small panel. Now, one thing that does help me is that I'm a pretty good draftsman, and so I always get excited when I draw a joke. I mean, when I write a joke that could only be done by someone who could draw really well, like something is complicated and needs to have a really good drawing with it to get the idea across. Mm-hmm. Because then I know that a lot of other competitors, just in a healthy, friendly kind of a sense of competition among my peers, I think, oh well, a lot of guys couldn't pull this one off. You have to be able to draw and pull this one off. So I always enjoy doing that. So it's a matter of learning how to draw cleanly and clearly enough so that you're not creating a mess, but complex enough that you can get the idea across. And I don't know. It's that's my best answer. I've never tried to deconstruct it and figure out how you do it. I just sort of learned to do it, and now I do it.
I see. Yeah. So you're still syndicated. Now it's by King Features, as a lot of the syndicates have disappeared. As newspaper sales have gone down, I guess, most of us have a sense that it's, being syndicated in newspapers isn't quite what it once was. But just how good or bad of a deal is it nowadays?
Yeah, it's... I don't know exactly what kind of a deal it is for other guys, because we get together once a year at these conventions and we chat and stuff, but we don't. I mean, everybody bitches and moans and complains about the newspaper industry shrinking and doing this and doing that, but nobody ever talks about how many papers they've lost or how much money they're not making, or you know what I'm saying? Like, that's more private. So nobody really talks about that. I know that guys have lost a lot of newspapers. Some people have lost a lot of newspapers over the years, in the recent, last 10 or 15 years. I have not, although recently my royalty check took a noticeable hit. It wasn't huge, but it was noticeable. It's like, I used to make this amount, and now I make 8% less every month than I used to. What's that about? And I asked my syndicate, and they were like, oh yeah, this group of newspapers is now lowering what they will pay for cartoons, and this is one of these big groups that owns a handful of papers, and they just said basically to the whole industry, you know what, we're not going to pay as much for cartoons as we used to. Sorry, it's our way or the highway. So everybody took a pay cut. So that's the kind of stuff that's happening. It is alarming because those of us in the business know that. I mean, it's just like, it's not like newspapers are going to suddenly make a comeback. It's an art form that is more or less on its way out. It might not ever disappear entirely, but it's never going to be what it was, because it's been replaced by the internet. And my stuff appears for free all over the internet. And so now it's like everybody's looking for a different model. How do we get paid? Because I can't. This is my job now. I can't afford to just do a cartoon a day, 365 days a year, like I've been doing it, if I'm not making any money at it. I just can't do it. I gotta spend my time in other ways, making money. So now, people are starting to rely, myself included, we're beginning to rely on things like Patreon, And just asking people, look, if you've been reading my work online for free for years, would you mind donating? A handful, just a few bucks here, a few bucks there, maybe commit to $5 a month, or $3 a month, or $1 a month, or whatever. And now we're just hoping that, nowadays the model is changing. And I know some cartoonists. I got some cartoonist friends here in California that are making a pretty good living just off of Patreon, because people like their work and they're saying, okay, I'm willing to pay for that every time you come out with a new page of comics or whatever. I'll pay you a certain amount of money. So I think that's kind of where it's going, at least for now. That seems to be where it's headed. And I've only just begun dabbling in that myself. And of course, it's a little bit hard because a lot of people assume, oh, well, you're already a famous cartoonist with a big syndicate. You don't need our money. Well, yeah, we do, because newspapers are not paying what they used to. And the vast majority of my readers are reading it absolutely for free. And I'm not getting anything. I mean, ad revenues off of page hits, that's nothing. That's really nothing. You could collect more change just walking around the streets and picking quarters out of the street. You could collect more money than you can from those things. Unless you happen to be one of the few people that's insanely popular for some reason on the internet. But anyway, so it's kind of a weird, shaky world now. We're all trying to figure out how we're going to be. We're all kind of wondering, like, will we be able to make a living doing this in 10 years? And if so, how? How are we going to do that? Mm-hmm. So everybody's asking that question. I haven't heard a great answer yet. But Patreon, that style of pay-as-you-go kind of thing is starting to look decent. I mean, it seems like a lot of people, and I've got a lot of readers that are like, hey, yeah, I totally get it. I've been reading you for years. I love your work. I'm happy to kick in a few bucks every month to support the habit. I appreciate what you're doing, and and that's nice. I think it makes people feel good to give to an artistic cause as well.
Mm-hmm. If you were starting out now, how would you go about it? Would you talk to a syndicate? Would you make a webcomic? What would you do?
I think your only option at this point is to go with webcomics. The syndicates, there's fewer syndicates, and they're not hiring nearly as many. They're not signing nearly as many new comics because newspapers are not buying new comics. So it's just there are still a handful of people who are going to who haven't been syndicated yet, who might make a living at it. But I mean, that's really literally a handful of people, probably as many people as you could fit into a minivan, will make a living as a syndicated cartoonist who haven't started yet. You know what I'm saying? Like brand new, right off the boat, start up a syndicated. It's just like those days are gone. I think nowadays you have to just go with a webcomic and then try to build up subscription services like Patreon. Try to, if you become popular enough, and believe me, that's not an easy thing to do. So much competition. But if you become popular enough on the web, you can start selling books and products and maybe start making a living. It's always been hard. And of course, it's always been hard in this country to make a living as a cartoonist. Even the syndicated guys, I think the majority of us, people always equate fame with wealth because that old saying, rich and famous.
Yeah.
But it's not true. You can be very famous as a cartoonist and still have to have a second job. A lot of guys do. I think it's just out of the several hundred professional cartoonists that I've known through the National Cartoonist Society, the guys that I see at the conventions every year, at our own convention every year, I bet 5% of them are, maybe 10% of them are making a living without having to subsidize it with, supplement it with like advertising art or whatever else they're doing. Like a lot of guys have second jobs. Mm-hmm. A lot of people have second jobs. And then like maybe 2% of them are what you'd call rich. Like people like Charles Schultz or Gary Trudeau, people that are in virtually every major newspaper in the world, and their books sell like crazy. And it's just, you're talking about like 1% of all cartoonists reach that level, and that includes the New Yorker.
We lost our phone connection at this point, and when we reconnected, I didn't get the recorder started right away. We rejoined the call as he's talking about why merchandising isn't a good option for him.
Licensing, because I don't have cute characters that you can put on stuff. That's just not, it's not my cartoon style. So basically all I've got are things like books, the occasional T-shirt or whatever. And people don't buy that kind of stuff so much anymore. They don't buy. I think that collections of cartoons, the sales for those are way down because people can go to a website and see every cartoon you've ever published right there on their website for free. So they don't buy collections. I suppose that makes sense. But so it's it just gets harder all the time. And that's all I'm trying to say is that rich and famous riches do not always follow fame. You could be a famous cartoonist and still be just getting by.
Coming up, the hidden symbols in Bizarro, why Dan isn't a political cartoonist, his fine art and vaudeville act, his upcoming international move, and his new coloring book. But first, if you value the content on Deconstructing Comics, Critiquing Comics, and To the Bat Poles, and want to help us move up to bigger and better things, how about donating a few bucks a month via Patreon at patreon.com/deconcomics? If everyone listening gave just $3 a month, it would make a big difference. We'd be able to reach several of our Patreon goals and bring you more content. If and when we hit our next goal, I'll make available the first 2.5 years of Deconstructing Comics, over 120 episodes that are currently missing from our website. We'd really appreciate it if everyone pitched in a few bucks a month to get us to that goal.
This is an imaginary podcast, which may never have happened.
The Shortbox Showcase.
But then again may have. About a father and daughter. I'm Professor Allen.
And I'm Emily.
Who came from Ohio and talked about comics.
Walking Dead.
Tintin.
Black Lightning.
White Tiger. It tells of their rise to glory, when the great guests were yet to be booked.
Let's put it this way, Shogun Warriors wasn't going to win any Eisners.
And the great feats of editing not yet performed.
This is Ultra 7, this is Ultraman Jack, and this Ultraman Taro, and this Ultraman Leo, and this
of how they spoke at length.
Continuity is really the brainchild of nitpicking nerds the world over.
But to be fair, the best kind of confession is the Force confession.
And reviewed in brief tales that explore creatively the bounds of a given character's history.
Red Sun is wonderful with a very strange ending.
Of brilliant creators before their fall from grace. This is the era where Miller is at the height of his creative and artistic powers, and the ability of strong writing to encapsulate and transcend its time.
Flash of Two Earths by Gardner Fox.
This is an imaginary podcast. Aren't they all? Shortbox Showcase is part of the Relatively Geeky family of podcasts. Check us out on the web at relativelygeekypodcast.blogspot.com or search in iTunes for Relatively Geeky or Shortbox Showcase. And remember, we're not experts.
We're just family.
So your comic, like every time there are some little symbols floating around in it, some loose eyeballs or slices of pie, there was a whole list of them on Wikipedia, all the different things that you put in. So what's the purpose of putting in those symbols? Is it some kind of horoscope or something?
I don't know. I've never actually noticed that. I've heard people talk about it, but I've never seen these symbols that people talk about, so I'm not sure what you mean. I'm kidding.
I thought you must be. Way back in the mid-'90s, let me start before that. When I was a kid, one of my favorite things was those was Highlights magazine, where they'd have a complicated picture and then a list of things you're supposed to find hidden in the picture. Loved those when I was a kid. Loved them. And so then in the 90s, I was doing my cartoon, and I was just, I don't know, I was kind of zoning out, and I thought, oh, you know what, I think I'm going to hide this little upside-down bird, and I'm just going to put this upside-down bird hanging from underneath this table, just for fun. I don't know, it just somehow it appealed to me that there'd be this little hidden thing in there. And I thought, I wonder if anybody will notice. Well, and then I did it again and again. I did it over a period of a couple weeks, and then I started getting emails of people saying, what's with that? And I realized other people like to find stuff in cartoons too. So I just started doing it more. And then I came up, and I did this probably for a couple of years. And then I decided, why not come up with a fun, bullshit philosophical reason for all of these different symbols. And so I created this whole system of thought,
about the reasoning for each of the cartoons and each of the symbols, and I posted it on Bizarro.com. It's kind of hard to find on there at the moment, but if you go to Bizarro.com and hit About, there's a link that says About, and then under that it says Secret Symbols. Anyway, if you go there, you can find out what all the secret symbols are. There's 11 of them, and what they mean, and how they can improve your life.
Okay. Yeah, I'd found the list on Wikipedia where they said the eyeball of observation and the pie of opportunity and so forth.
Right. Yes. It's all very complicated, Tim.
Okay. Bizarro occasionally gets a little bit political, but have you ever done any like straight up political cartooning?
No, I have not, and that's why I occasionally get political in Bizarro. No, honestly, I don't have the stomach to be a political cartoonist. It's drives me crazy. It just drives me crazy. If I had to live in that world, I think that I would just always be a wreck. It's only like the occasional craziness in politics that will drag me into it, like George W. Bush and 9/11 and the war on Iraq. That just incensed me. The whole thing just blew my mind, and so I started following politics because it was all just so outrageous. And then I found myself, because I was following it, I found the ideas creeping into my cartoons, and then when that stuff kind of passed, I just stopped paying attention to politics again in any kind of detailed form. I'd hit a headline now and again, but I wouldn't read it in detail. And then when Donald Trump came along and started running for president, at first I just thought it was hilarious. So I was following him just purely for self-amusement, just like, oh my God, this complete, utter nutbag is actually what? He's gaining, People are dropping out. He's the nominee. Oh my God. So at first it was hilarious. And then as the months went by, it became increasingly terrifying. And so here I found myself reading about politics every single day. And then it started sneaking into my cartoons again. Who knows what will happen. If he loses, then I'll probably drop back out and stop doing political. It's typically during election cycles that I end up doing political cartoons. Now, I do have my like social commentary political cartoons, like broad strokes kind of stuff, but I rarely will make fun of a specific or call attention to a specific candidate or politician, because I'm actually not supposed to do it. Newspaper editors will buy a cartoon. If it's a funny cartoon, they'll put it on the funny pages, and if it's an editorial cartoon, they put it on the op-ed pages, and they don't like you to cross over, because then they get complaints, and they have to waste their day answering complaints from people who are upset that an opinion was on the funny pages. Because I get tons of these things. I read the comics to escape. I don't read it to find out your lame opinion about politics. Well, yeah, but then you turn the page and you read somebody else's lame opinion about politics. You read the editorial cartoons. So why does that upset you so much? Who knows? But it does. So I'm really not even supposed to do it. But sometimes I can't resist. I cannot resist this whole Donald Trump thing. I mean, it's just so much comedy there. There's just and people are like, why don't you make fun of Hillary? Well, for one thing, Hillary Clinton is anything but funny. That's one of her problems. She's not a very funny, engaging person. She has she has a wonky personality. She's a personality of a political wonk, and those are pretty dull people. That's who you want. I mean, like if you're going to have somebody build a bridge, you want an engineer. And most engineers are not comedians. Engineers are fairly dull people. That's who you want to build your bridge. I want a dull person as a politician. That's fine by me, but she's not funny. So no, I don't do jokes about Hillary Clinton because she's just not funny. On top of which, there's no chance I would do anything to risk her not beating Trump, because that, of course, would just be the end of Western civilization. As anybody with an IQ, a measurable IQ knows, it's just, this guy is nothing but disaster. So anyway, I end up doing cartoons about Trump.
Yeah. Well, I saw like 12 years ago you did a cartoon. I think it was 12 years ago. That referenced gay marriage, and I guess there was some controversy about that.
Yeah. Now I can get away with it, but I first started doing gay marriage cartoons quite a while ago, and yeah, there were actually some markets. I'm in like, I don't know, 300, 350 markets or something, and there were a number of markets in the United States that wouldn't run it. They didn't, and it was not that it was a controversial cartoon; it's just that it mentioned gay marriage, and that was something they were not ready to even do in certain markets. Yeah, so it was just kind of mind-blowing. And I thought, based on that kind of just blind ignorance and bigotry toward gay people, I never thought I would live to see gay marriage legalized by the Supreme Court. Are you kidding me?
Yeah, it really turned around in 10 years.
Yeah, it happened so fast. And yeah, I mean, you can still hear it in my voice. I'm still astounded. Mm-hmm. My girlfriend and I were just talking about this the other day. It's like, did you ever know? We never thought we'd see this in our lifetime. It's unbelievable. So, and it's a good thing. But so now I can do gay marriage jokes, which I do. Like that I think it was more of a social, not really politics, but sociology. Mm-hmm. This kind of social attitude sort of editorial. And I've always liked doing those kinds of things where I just poke fun at the kinds of attitudes that people have towards certain issues. Those kind of things I've always seen as being I don't really see that as a political joke, but people make a political issue out of it, of course.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Have you ever done any like sequential art comics?
A tiny bit. I've had a few Sunday. I don't know how many. Maybe, 30 years of cartoons. That's however many, 30 times 52 Sundays. So yeah, I would say out of the 30 years I've been doing Bizarro, there have been sequential jokes in my Sunday cartoons, probably 2 dozen times. Not that much, but I've done it a bit. Outside of Bizarro, I've got, writing and drawing and coloring a joke every day for years on end without a break or a vacation or time off or anything is a daunting task. So I have not found that I have a whole lot of extra jokes and energy left to draw comics for things outside of Bizarro.
Yeah.
This is this one deadline I got. So I pretty much put all my cartooning into Bizarro. I haven't done outside sequential stuff is what I'm trying to say. But I've done sequential stuff within Bizarro. Virtually always on, I guess it's really always on Sunday. But occasionally on a daily comic, I'll do a two-panel joke, just split it in half. But mostly it's sequential stuff I've done in Bizarro, and I do enjoy it. I like. In fact, I started writing as a long-form story with regular characters and a story and all that kind of stuff. I actually started writing that some months ago, thinking that I would start drawing it and create it, put it online, and see if I could get people to support it through Patreon. And I may still do it. It's kind of a surreal version of the Old West, because like I was saying earlier with Tumbleweeds, I do enjoy the Old West. So I started doing that, and it's still sitting here on my computer, but I have not been able to find the time to actually finish, to actually draw it. I've been writing it. I've got, I don't know how much written, but anyway, I've got it planned and parts of it written, but I haven't actually come around to producing it yet. Maybe someday I will. If Bizarro's, if the income for Bizarro drops low enough, maybe I'll go into panic mode and create. No, maybe that's when I'll create this other thing and see if it has any legs. I don't know. We'll see.
Any favorites among like sequential art creators?
Yeah, it's funny when people ask me these things, I can never think of them. I have always been a fan of the single panel gag. I'm not a big fan of sequential stories and stuff. I don't get involved in stories. Like when I would watch, like I was saying earlier, when I would buy comic books as a kid, it was all about the art. I really didn't care anything about the stories. And it's still kind of that way. And it's not to say that I never care about stories. I get hooked on TV series. I get hooked on books. I read novels. I read regularly. And but when it comes to comics, I'm not a regular reader of sequential comics. I'm not sure why that is. It just doesn't suit me for some reason. Who do you like?
Ooh.
Yeah, it's a hard question, isn't it?
Yeah. Brian Lee O'Malley.
What does he do?
He did like Scott Pilgrim.
Oh, right. Yeah, they made a movie out of that, didn't they?
Yeah, they did.
Yeah, I'm sure there's. I have no doubt that there's tons of great stuff out there, but for some reason I just don't find the time to look into it.
Now I understand. Besides Bizarro, you're doing other kinds of artistic, like some fine art or a vaudeville act. What else are you doing?
Yeah, I did. I've done both of those things. I toured the country as a stand-up comic. I toured the country as with a one-man show, which is the vaudeville act that you're referring to. I've done that stuff, and I also enjoy doing fine art, which doesn't look anything like my comics. There's like a lot of cartoonists will like later in their later years they'll do fine art, and it's basically just like looser versions of their cartoon art. And I don't know why I think that's funny, but I do. But that's not at all what I do. I do these elaborate oil paintings that look sort of in the style of Italian Renaissance Catholic paintings. And they look, and then they kind of, some of them look like they're basically surreal. I mean, the fact, I use a lot of religious imagery, but I'm not a religious person, but it's primarily because I'm fascinated by that kind of art, and I like creating a big painting that looks like it came right out of the 16th century, but then it's got some modern elements in it. If you look more closely, you realize, oh, well, this guy's actually wearing Doc Martens, and and it's not meant to be a joke. It's just like I just find that the combination of those kinds of images interesting, and so my paintings, are kind of like surreal Italian Renaissance style oil paintings.
I see.
And I sell them. I do commissions, and I've never done a one-man show of those things, but occasionally we'll put them in group shows and things.
Okay. What did you do in the vaudeville act?
Oh gosh, everything. I would start out with it was actually kind of a cool thing. I always wanted it to somehow get picked up, just to do a 30-minute special on Comedy Central HBO or something like this, a 30-minute comedy special, just so I'd have a good version of it on tape. But that never happened. So as it turned out, as it is, I've got a number of crappy versions of it on home video that various people have tried to tape over the years. But I had sets. It was like multimedia. I had sets and backdrops and costumes, everything happened on stage. I had like these kind of little buildings, little miniature buildings around and I could get behind the buildings. And while I was playing a video, I'd go behind these little buildings and squat down and change into a different costume and come out as Frida Kahlo and sing a song about her husband Diego Rivera. I would stick these puppets up from behind I had a couple of dog puppets that would have these humorous conversations and drawing contests. Yeah, there was one. I did a thing with these dog puppets, where the dog puppets have a drawing competition. So I was drawing like the dogs. I have a puppet on my left hand, a puppet on my right hand, and each of them has a Sharpie, and they each have their own easel with a pad of paper, and then I would draw with both hands at the same time, sort of mirror images of, which is how your brain works. It looks like an astounding trick, but it's actually the way your brain works. You can literally draw mirror images with each hand at the same time. It's pretty fun if you've got decent hand skills. I mean, if you can draw at all. If you can't draw at all, then no, it doesn't work that way. But if you can draw, you can probably draw almost the same thing with both hands in mirror image simultaneously. So I used to do that. I would do other kinds of songs. I would play a cardboard guitar and do all the music part with my mouth in between the words. I did a mind reading act with the audience. I used to have people come up. I'd have a volunteer from the audience come up and then draw a portrait of them while blindfolded. It's just various weird shit. And I would show cartoons and I would just tell stories. One of the most popular sections was hate mail. I would read some of the most vitriolic and ridiculous hate mail that I've gotten over the years. People just complaining about all kinds of crazy shit that wasn't even in the cartoon that they were referring to. I mean, it's just the nuttiest shit ever. and like, you know, you get these like real crazy, like a Trump supporter. Like you get that kind of person railing against some political view of mine, and it's really hilarious, and they're barely literate, you know, that kind of thing. But that was, I mean, people were in stitches. That was the easiest routine to get. People were almost literally falling. Notice I correctly used the word almost literally falling out of their chairs over the weird shit that people complain about over the years. Right? I have some pretty great hate mail. Anyway, that's what the show is like.
I see. So what's coming next from you?
Oh man, well, you know what? I'm actually getting ready to move to Mexico.
Oh wow.
That's absolutely true. My girlfriend and I, I've been involved in this long, protracted legal battle with an ex-wife over some property that she and I owned together in New York. So while that was happening, I've been renting. Because I'm not a super rich guy, so I can only afford to own one house at a time. And I owned the place that she was squatting in for years, and it took me like 5 years to get her out. Once I got my money back out of that house, where my girlfriend and I are like, so where are we gonna buy? Well, not in Los Angeles, that's for damn sure, because the real estate market here is just absurd. And then I got to researching all around the country, and I found that I kind of can't afford to buy a decent house in any city in the United States that I would want to live in. I mean, I could go back to Oklahoma, but I don't want to do that. I would like to live in more interesting kind of artistic city, and the real estate's just way too expensive. So then she and I visit Mexico fairly frequently, and there's a really beautiful Spanish colonial town in the mountains of central Mexico that looks and feels more like Europe than it does like anything most people have seen in Mexico. Nothing like a border town, nothing like a beach town. Just like ancient 500-year-old Spanish buildings and cobblestone streets. And we love this place, and it's full of artists, tons of art and artists and galleries. And anyway, so we thought, you know what, to hell with the United States, let's buy a house in, I don't mean that in some kind of a giant way, to hell with the United States part, I mean. Like to hell with the real estate market in Southern California, let's buy a place in Mexico. And so we bought a place outright for cash in Mexico, which you can actually do for less than the down payment on a crappy house in Los Angeles. And so instead of saddling myself with a 30-year mortgage at the age of 58, which would literally be, I would be paying that out for the rest of my life if I even live long enough. So it's for less than what would have been a down payment on a crummy house in Los Angeles, in a crummy neighborhood, by my standards, we bought a really nice house in a really beautiful little town with even better weather than Southern California and tons of art. And we're in a couple of months here, we're going to move down to Mexico, and that's where I'm going to live. I think some people, I mentioned this on my blog a couple of times. I was buying this house in Mexico, and I think people thought it was a vacation home or something. No. That's not me. That's Matt Groening. I don't have that kind of money. I don't buy vacation homes. I can only afford to buy one place at a time, and so we bought a place in Mexico. Yeah, so I'm moving to Mexico, and it's going to be. It's sort of, it's a little bit part of my retirement plan. Not that I'm going to give up Bizarro, but it's just like I don't think I'll ever be able to afford to retire. I mean, ever. If I keep living in places like New York and Los Angeles and San Francisco and Portland, the places that I like. I can't, I'll never retire if I keep doing that. So I'm going to move down there, and I'll be able to retire. And I'll also be able to do more paintings and probably build a little bit of a fine art business there for myself.
I see.
So that's what's next for me. Man. Oh, I also have a coloring book. You know this adult coloring book craze?
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't know about it myself until I started posting these weird things from my sketchbooks online. And people instantly were like, "Oh my God, you got to get into coloring books." I go, "What's coloring books for kids?" They go, "No, for adults." So I look into the industry, and I found out that there's a big industry of this thing. So I got with a publisher, and I created this coloring book, and it's only just now being released. It's called Bizarro Land, and you can find it. Yeah, just if you Google my last name, Bizarro Land, adult coloring book, whatever, you can find it on Amazon. The publisher is Dover. All artists know Dover Books. They publish art books. Anyway, so Dover Books is published, and it's just now hitting stores, and I'm excited about it because honestly, this is some of the coolest drawings. I had more fun doing this book than almost anything I've ever done. It's like incredibly elaborate, strange little cartoon cities and worlds and planets, and it's just infinitely complicated because these people who color like really complicated images. And it's like, and all of my secret symbols appear at least once in every single page. 31 pages of insane drawings. I guarantee you're gonna like it. It's only $5.99 for crying out loud. $6. You gotta buy 10 of them. But anyway, at that price. Anyway, it's I guarantee you're gonna feel like you're gonna spend $6 and feel like you get $60 worth of art. I guarantee. And I'm not typically much of a salesman, but I'm getting all Trump on you. Believe me, this is the most amazing book. This book is so much better than anyone else's book. It is a really cool coloring book, though. You're going to like it.
Okay. Okay, great.
Yeah.
Read Bizarro at bizarro.com. You can write us at mail@deconstructingcomics.com or look us up on Patreon, Twitter, Tumblr, Facebook, and YouTube. All our social media links can be found on the right sidebar at deconstructingcomics.com. Also, please give us a review on iTunes or Stitcher. Our theme is from bensound.com. Last Thursday on To the Bat Poles, we discussed the cat's meow and the bat's kowtow, and our friend Wally Wingert stopped by to discuss his role in the new animated movie, Return of the Caped Crusaders. Look up To the Bat Poles wherever you find your podcasts, or at tothebatpoles.libsyn.com. This coming Thursday, right here in this podcast feed, the latest edition of our spin-off podcast, Critiquing Comics, where Mulele and I critique comics by listeners. If you're looking for some constructive feedback on your comic, send it to us at mail@deconstructingcomics.com, and please try to keep it to about 30 pages. This year's Kaigai Manga Festa, or International Comics Festival, was held here in Tokyo October 23rd. Traditionally, our coverage of this event has been a two-parter, and I'm expecting that to be true this year as well. So be here for part 1 next week, and we'll talk with some old friends and first-timers at Kaigai Manga Festa. Till then, this is Tim, and thanks for listening to Deconstructing Comics.